Hey guys, George at SoundTraxx here, and we're back at the layout, but not because we're all working at home or anything, so everybody's still good in that regard. But we're here because I was actually playing around with some locomotives, and I decided to give something a try. Now, some of you guys have heard me give this presentation in classes and clinics and things like that I've done over the past, where we talk about pulling locomotives dead in tow and what you could possibly do. So I was sitting at home playing around this weekend and decided to try it out and play with it and actually build this. And this is actually a kind of a cool thing. So we're going to talk about how to do that, and then we're going to take it for a few test runs, and then we'll show you what it sounds like. So let's get started. So first thing is, what are we talking about? So if any of you guys out there have too many locomotives, raise your hand. Okay. Now, one of the things we see a lot of times in real trains is where they'll do a power move, but instead of having all the locomotives powered, they'll actually have one or two locomotives on the front pulling the train, and then the rest of the locomotives are just dead in tow. And what that does, though, is that it makes a little bit of a challenge for those of us with sound decoders, because how do you get the locomotives to sound quiet on the trail? Well, you could enable the mute, and that's a very valid possibility. But with the SoundTraxx Tsunami2, we have what's called an alternate volume mixer. And the alternate volume mixer is a second set of volume controls that allows you to control the volume of the sounds with a secondary mixer. Now, some of the original thoughts behind this feature is so that you can have a volume setting for when you're home, and then you can have a volume setting for when you're at the club or a public display. Because when we're at a club or public display, we tend to want the volumes to be much louder. But when we're at home and there's not all the ambient noise going along, now we want them to be a little quieter and a little bit more realistic in scale sound. But what we can do is we can actually manipulate the alternate volume mixer. And what we're going to do in this particular case is, for the lead locomotives, we're going to have them just retain their diesel engine sounds and everything. So these two locomotives here on the point are powered up, and they're ignoring the alternate volume mixer command. Now, the alternate volume mixer is enabled in the trailing 4 locomotives, and we'll run them by here in just a moment. And what I did in this particular case was I had disabled pretty much every sound that's in the mix, except the wheel clickety-clack. Now, we can get into a discussion about the brake settings, and I'm not real worried about that. If you want to enable them, you can enable them. In this particular case, I chose to disable them, just because the air brake sound of a train brake wouldn't actually be coming out of the trailing locomotives. But again, this is where you can decide for yourself. Now, what this does is this allows the lead locomotives to be pulling the diesel engine, and you can hear the diesel engines roaring as they go past. But then as the trailing locomotives in tow come past you, now all you hear is their wheel click. So when I enabled this, now what I did was I took the alternate volume mixer and I moved my settings around quite a bit. And some of you guys know this, and if not, one of the FlexMap function mapping features allows you to create a complete roster for your liking. Now, what I did in this case was function 13 is the coupler sound. Now, I personally don't use the coupler sound at all. So I disable it, take it out of the function mapping chart, which then frees up function 13. So what I did is, in my FlexMap function mapping with CV 1.284, I set the alternate volume mixer to a value of 13 so that the function 13 will enable it. Now, of course, as the single locomotive, you could enable function 13 and you'll get that alternate mixer sound, but you really wouldn't want to do that, because then, of course, you'd lose your prime mover, your horn, your bell, and all of that. But when you're in a consist, we can enable that in the consist. But first, let's finish up on the volumes. So your alternate volume mixer starts at CV's 2.289 and runs through 2.320. Now, pretty much what I did with these particular locomotives is I took all of those volumes and set them to 0. Things like the dynamic brake, the engine, the air compressors, the radiator fans, all of those things that would be running when the diesel engine was running. Now, again, all I left was the wheel clickety-clack. Now, because this isn't a real prominent sound, I take those volumes down quite a bit, and I actually set the CV for the alternate volume and the main volume to match, and I use a value of 40. So once you do that, when you enable function 13, all of the sounds mute except the wheel clack. Now, as we've talked about in the past, with an advanced consist, now you can tell the decoder which functions and commands to respond to. So in this particular case, this consists of locomotives. I have 6 locomotives, 2 on the front, which are actually pulling the train, and then I have 4 trailing, which are dead in tow. So on these lead locomotives, I've told them in my advanced consist in CV245 to ignore function 13. But all my trailing locomotives, I have told them to respond to function 13. So now when I'm in my consist, in this case my lead locomotive is 2031, so I chose consist number 31, so it's easy to remember from the lead unit. So when I select loco 31 on my throttle, and now when I turn on function 13, these 2 locomotives continue making sound, as you can hear, but the rest of these locomotives go quiet because all those other sounds are now muted. As long as I'm running this consist under address 31, whenever I turn on function 13, these locomotives will stay quiet. Now, if I wanted them to come back on and add into the diesel engine sound, I could simply turn off function 13, and these diesel engines will now come back to life. I know this sounds a little tricky, but it's actually pretty cool. Try it out, and let's take a look and see what this looks like running. Now here we are in the same position. Let's take a listen at what this sounds like without the diesel engines pulling. So I'm simply going to take these guys off the track. And now you notice there's actually no sound. But when I start running the locomotives forward, now as you hear them come past, you'll hear nothing but the clickety-clack. Now guys, I hope this was exciting for you. It's another little feature that's built into the decoder that maybe it wasn't intended initially, but it gives you a whole lot more flexibility, and it allows you to really mimic real locomotives and real railroading. Now, for more information, please visit our website at SoundTraxx.com, and also be sure to check out the website where the user's guide explains all of the features in detail, including the CVs we've talked about here today, so that way you can try to see what other features are built in the decoder that work for you.